Today, I'm gonna take you back to the past. To play the No, that's another guy. No, let me take you back to the times of legends. The times when gods walked the earth and warriors battled monsters to protect the land. The mythical era called the 1990s.
Excellent!
Back in those days, there was a sacred ritual that my mother and I would perform every Saturday night. Going out for pizza. We were loyal to the traditional neighborhood pizzeria, owned by some fat, angry Italian dude I am sure was in the witness protection program. Be it as it may, dude made tremendous pizza. Really thick crust with lots of cheese and so oily that it certainly contributed to the eventual collapse of my gallbladder. On the second floor above the pizzeria was a video games rental store. Until then, the only one in my vicinity. The custom for my mother and I during that time was simple. We would go to the pizzeria, place an order, wait for it to be done. She would meet someone she knew, since apparently everyone in our town bought pizza at the exact same place. She and her friend would start yapping, and I would move myself to the video game store, where I would wait until it was time for us to pick our little disc of happiness and depart. Now, for those of you who never lived through the era of video game rental stores, oh my god, you missed so much. Oh god, it was awesome. Look, I can tell you, those were magical places. Back then, games were not something as mainstream as they are today. Kids were divided into two factions. Those who liked video games and those who also liked video games but kept it a secret so they could bully the other ones. For someone who didn't hide their passion for pixelated goodness, a video game rental store was a sanctuary where we could talk about our hobby without fear of reprisal. Sure, kids were divided into groups like the Sega fanboys and the Nintendo zealots, but it was a friendly rivalry most of the time. That said, every kid had his own routine when entering a rental store. Mine consisted of going to the NES shelf, my system at a time, looking at all the titles like a wine connoisseur, analyzing vintage bottles, then moving on to the shelves of consoles that I didn't own. The Super Nintendo, Master System, Game Boy, Game Gear, and Mega Drive, in that order. Yes, I refuse to call it a Sega Genesis. Deal with it! After checking out all the shelves, I would go watch some random ugly kid playing on one of the store's consoles and whose parents were also waiting for pizza downstairs. Then finally I would walk to the store's counter, which had some exclusive games for sale. The games that were placed on the sales counter were not memorable titles. Quite the opposite, actually. Games that were too unpopular, too old, or too Japanese to generate consistent profit to rentals were put up for sale. The idea was to convince some uninformed kid that the cartridge he was about to purchase was a diamond in the rough, when in fact it was fossilized poop. Normally, I didn't care much for the games for sale. I saw them as a curiosity. But everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. One night, a specific game caught my attention. It belonged to the too Japanese category. It was a Sega Mega Drive game, and on its cover we could see a young monk using all his strength to create a sphere of ki while letting out a scream kept inaudible by the poor audio capabilities of paper. In the background, a mustachioed man who was the obvious villain of the game laughed at the boy and his inability to conjure a decent Hadouken. There was nothing special about the image, but it caught my attention enough since it was drawn in manga style. Manga and anime had not yet exploded in the West. We were a few years away from the Dragon Ball Z phenomenon, and any material originating from the land of the rising waifus was extremely rare by then. I was already fascinated by such art style, mainly because adults in the 1980s and 1990s seemed to collectively dislike anime. I remember my mother describing them as horrible, full of death and violence, and like any good tweener, I was fascinated by anything that shocked my parents. Well, There I was with the cartridge box in my hands, and I decided to look at the back to see if there was any pictures of the game in all its 16-bit glory. That's when I saw it for the first time. The naked woman! My eyes widened when I saw the girl, and I looked around to make sure there wasn't an adult nearby, ready to take the game from my sausage fingers if they noticed how inappropriate it was for my innocent eyes. Now, it wasn't the nudity that got to me. Not at all. Like any child of the 1980s, I had seen more naked women by the age of 10 than any generation before me saw their entire lives, thanks to movies like Private Resort, Fraternity Vacation, Porky's, Revenge of the Nerds, Return of the Living Dead, and Monique Gabrielle's entire career. A pair of boobs didn't faze me anymore at this point. If they were flesh and blood, that is. Animated boobs were still a taboo. See, back then, cartoons were things intrinsically associated with children. Grown-ups didn't watch cartoons. They drank cognac, thought about Rome, and went to boring lunches with people they hated for pure social dogma. The same rule applied to kids. If they wanted to be taken seriously after a certain age, they would have to ditch Transformers and He-Man in favor of more adult things, like the Garbage Pail Kids or Dinosaurs Attack cards. Also Friday the 13th. Nothing said coming of age in those days more than watching all of Jason Voorhees' greatest hits. Anyway, cartoons were made to be a safe space for children, where nobody ever got hurt and all conflicts ended with the heroes laughing at something that wouldn't make a newborn giggle. There was no room for hard violence or sex here. Those were adult things. Yes, I am aware of the Transformers movie where everybody dies. I am also aware of that time where the Baroness spent an entire G.I. Joe episode in a swimsuit. Those were anomalies, the exception to the rule. Okay, they were not the rule. Okay. Video games were not that far removed from cartoons, considering that some of the most violent things you could play on the NES were Contra, Ninja Gaiden, Double Dragon, games with action of course, but no blood and guts. We were still a few years away from Mortal Kombat. Of course, once in a while we would see a nice set of Booba on the NES, but they were always covered. Nothing that we wouldn't see regularly on television back in those days. So that's the logic that made the image of that naked girl on the video game cover stay with me. She was out of place, being tortured or abused in some way that never happened in the cartoons or video games that I used to consume at the time. It was like seeing Santa Claus banging your mom, two things so opposite and conflicting that a kid's brain was unable to process them. This was the reason why anime was so fascinating to me. It blurred the dividing line between childish and adult like nothing else could. Those were cartoons with nudity, brutality, where heroes would cause villains to explode in a geyser of entrails just to be seduced by young women without a single piece of clothing on the next scene. It was like seeing something pure from childhood being corrupted and become forbidden. And it was absolutely amazing. The game eventually disappeared from the video game store. Hell, the video game store eventually disappeared thanks to the rampant piracy that took my country by storm during the 32-bit era. No rental chain could compete with the buy 3 games for $10 that the pirates offered. Nevertheless, the image of that naked girl on the cover of the Mega Drive game haunted me for years. What game was that? What was its story? Who was that girl? Did she also appear naked in the game?
Who am I? What am I?
I only found out the answers to these questions decades later with the advent of the internet. The cartridge adorned by the mysterious nude blonde girl was Mystic Defender, or Kujakuo 2 Geneijo, as some of you already deduced. The game is an okay side-scroller released for the Sega Mega Drive in 1990 that would eventually be forgotten, except by the most avid collectors of Sega's 16-bit games and 40-something-year-olds obsessed with anime booba from the past. Kujakuo 2 Geneijo is based on the manga of the same name, created by Makoto Ogino and released in 1985. In the story, we follow a young Buddhist monk named Kujaku on several spiritual adventures where he travels around helping those in need. But since that wasn't selling, the series eventually became a traditional manga with fighting, action, and titty. In the 1990s, Kujakuo was turned into a gore-filled OVA, as it was the style at the time. The animation was directed by Ichiro Itano, responsible for other ultra-violent anime of the era, such as Angel Cop and Violence Jack, Evil Town. The animation was released in the US under the name Peacock King Spirit Warrior, an almost direct translation of its original title. Now, I've never watched the OVA before you ask, but look who's on the cover! The blonde girl, completely naked, just as I remembered her! By the way, her name is Asura, and she's the protagonist's girlfriend. In both the game and the anime, the girl was kidnapped by Oda Nobunaga, who I bet most of you already identify the moment I show the game's cover, and who starred in my award-winning video Yasuke Should Have Had Its Own Game. His own game. Not its. He's not a thing, he's a he. I don't even know the names of my own videos! Anyway, I will link it in the description. The video, not Yasuke. Anyway, Nobunaga intended to use her in his nefarious plan to awaken an ancient demon and condemn humanity to 1,000 years of darkness. How? I don't know! I only know that involved getting her naked. Oh, Nobunaga, you're incorrigible. By the way, have you noticed that freeing an ancient demon is basically the I'm going to create a biological weapon that only obeys me of old-time villains? And usually, releasing an unholy beast from hell always ends as well as that time Wesker released the tyrant from his pod. Centuries go by and villains never learn. After figuring out what game was this and what was the story of the girl with a total disregard for clothes in its box, I only had one question left. Did she also appear naked in the game? Oh yes sir, she did! Once we rescued her from Oda's clutches, Asura appeared in all her naked glory, but only in the Japanese version. From what I gathered, the first copies of the Western version also showed her in her birthday suit, but this was corrected in later batches of the game. Now, if you think the censorship in the American version was bad, it's because you haven't seen the Korean version. Anyway, that's it. This is the story of the mysterious naked women on the cover of a Mega Drive game. Why did I bother telling you all of this? Probably because I'm a gooner, you're thinking. Well, that too. But there was something else I wanted to discuss with you guys. One of the things I miss the most about childhood is the ability to be amazed by anything. As we grow up, we become more cynical, jaded. Life hardens us and makes it increasingly difficult to be surprised by something. We lose this ability to be amazed as we grow up. And although it thinks it is something necessary, it is also something that makes the world much less magical. We grow more attached to the memories of the past, the sensations we had when learning about the world, and that's why I think it is important to preserve that aspect of childhood for the new generations, so they can grow with experience that will leave a positive mark on them, giving them memories they will hold on to forever. But is it possible to do so nowadays? Do kids still have such experiences? The moment a kid is old enough to talk, their parents slap a smartphone or tablet in their hands. Kids are bombarded with constant stimuli from TikTok, social media, memes. It's a non-stop cycle of consuming information, regurgitating it, and doing it all over again. Movies, TV shows, music, video games. All culture now is a constant cacophony of noise trying to get our attention just so it can all be forgotten in a few weeks for the cycle to begin anew. I know this might sound like an old man yells at clouds moment, and that maybe kids today are having experiences similar to mine in spirit, but so alien to a man of my generation that I can't really identify them. But hear me out. The story I told about the naked lady on the video game cover happened in 1991. It's a memory I carried for over 30 years. It reminds me of a different time when I wasn't as aware of the world I am living as I am today, when even something as irrelevant as an image on the back of a video game box could become a mystery, something that would make me ponder, what else is out there? It's not just a Mega Drive game with a naked woman on its box, it's the memory of a unique moment of discovery, where my perceptions of the world were challenged, and it's something that will stay with me forever. And it worries me that children today might lose this sense of discovery, when they live in a time of breakneck speed of information, where nothing can last more than a few days, and their young brains can't have a moment of peace. But this is just me ranting. So, do you have any pop culture memories from when you were growing up that stayed with you? Tell me in the comments. I try to read all of them. If you think I'm wrong and that kids will be fine, let me know as well. I'd love to have your takes on this subject. So, this is it for now. I'll see you guys on the next one. Until then, always remember to flush. Also, remember that there are no bad ideas, only bad writers. See you guys.